Let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're putting on our detective hats to investigate a hypothetical, high-stakes data breach at a place we'll call EdTech High. We're going to use this fictional crime scene as our study guide to untangle the very real and honestly very complex world of student privacy and federal regulations.
So what happens when the school bell rings but the data leaks? Imagine the absolute panic when sensitive student records and third-party app data suddenly find their way onto the web. Parents are furious, students are exposed, administrators are scrambling. To solve this case and figure out exactly what went wrong, we've got to consult the ultimate rulebook, Federal Education Privacy Laws in the U.S.
All right, so we have a massive incident on our hands. We're talking compromised grades, disciplinary actions, health data, online activities, the whole shebang. To start categorizing our evidence, we actually have to look way back to a foundational law passed in 1974. It's called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. You'll usually hear it called FERPA or sometimes the Buckley Amendment. Basically, this law governs any institution that receives federal funding, and it applies some major fair information practice principles right to student data.
Part 1. The incident and the evidence. You see, FERPA strictly defines what actually counts as protected evidence in our investigation. Not all leaked data is treated the same. To classify the stolen files, we really have to separate highly sensitive, personally identifiable information, or PII for short, from basic directory information. Now, PII includes things like social security numbers, family addresses, or really anything that links back to a student's identity with reasonable certainty. That stuff absolutely requires valid, written consent to disclose. But on the flip side, directory information, things like honors received, degrees, maybe a student's major, well, that's generally not considered harmful if it gets out. In fact, schools can actually share that unless a student or parent specifically opts out.
Let's move on to Part 2, the victims and their rights.
Our investigation now turns to the victims of this breach. We need to figure out who actually has the legal right to access, control, and amend these compromised records. And the law gets surprisingly layered here when it comes to the transfer of rights. You see, while a student is in high school and under 18, the parents hold the keys. They have the FERPA rights, and they control the disclosures. But the very moment a student turns 18, or if they head exclusively to a college or university, regardless of their age, those FERPA rights transfer entirely to the student. At that point, the student would literally have to sign a written consent form just to let their parents see their grades. But, and this is a big but, there's a fascinating loophole in our rulebook. Even if a student is 18 and officially holds their own FERPA rights, a school can still legally disclose educational records to the parents without the student's consent. How? Well, if the student is claimed as a tax dependent by either parent. It's a critical exception, and honestly, it's one that often surprises a lot of families.
Now, as the victims of this breach scramble to find out exactly what happened to their files, they definitely have rights. If a right holder requests to inspect their compromised records, FERPA guarantees the educational institution has to provide access to those files within 45 days of the request. No way around it. The school just has to use reasonable measures to verify the identity of the person making the request first, for obvious reasons.
Okay, Part 3. The interrogation, focusing on the PPRA and surveys.
Let's keep digging and look for a motive here. Specifically, we're looking to see if student data was exploited for commercial purposes before it ever even leaked. If the leaked data includes sensitive student surveys, another law completely kicks in. That's the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, or PPRA. Passed back in 1978, it gives parents the direct right to inspect and opt out of data collection if it concerns highly personal topics. We're talking things like political affiliations, mental or psychological problems, sex behavior and attitudes, illegal behavior, or even just family income. And later on, the No Child Left Behind Act actually broadened this. It required schools to enact strict policies if they're collecting this kind of personal information for commercial purposes.
Part 4. The EdTech Suspects.
We're now turning our magnifying glass to the third-party EdTech suspects. As you know, the use of educational technology apps and portals in schools just skyrocketed during the remote learning shift, and that heavy reliance is still very much with us today. And history actually gives us a major clue here about those third-party risks. Just look at the year 2014. A massive lawsuit against Google forced a huge industry shift. California students who are using apps for education sued, accusing Google of scanning millions of student emails. The Electronic Privacy Information Center stepped in and advocated for a Department of Education FERPA investigation. And wouldn't you know it, soon after Google changed its business practices to make sure student emails couldn't be used for commercial purposes.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that EdTech providers aren't just operating in the Wild West. The FTC strictly enforces the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or CIPP, against these companies. This enforcement is all about stopping unreasonable mandatory data collection, prohibiting them from keeping data longer than necessary, and, most importantly, strictly banning the use of children's personal information for any commercial advertising.
Which brings us to Part 5, the preventative checklist. To wrap up our case, we really need to synthesize our findings into a preventative study guide. Think of it as a checklist to stop future breaches from happening. Schools absolutely must follow these essential steps to protect the massive troves of sensitive data they hold. Step 1, you've got to use what FERPA calls reasonable methods to verify identity. We're talking PINs, personal security questions, or even biometric indicators. Step 2, secure any student financial aid data by complying with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act Safeguards Rule. Step 3, implement the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Actually, a lot of states mandate that one now. And Step 4, always be on the lookout for vendors who have officially signed the industry's Student Privacy Pledge.
Created by the Future of Privacy Forum and the Software and Information Industry Association, that Student Privacy Pledge is a real game changer. By 2020, over 400 companies had already signed it. It officially bans selling student personal information, and it bans building student profiles for anything other than educational purposes. And get this, violating this pledge actually subjects a company to enforcement by the FTC as a deceptive trade practice. They don't mess around.
Finally, Part 6, Case Closed.
As we finally close the case file on the EduTech High breach, let's review one last, totally critical exception under FERPA. Because sometimes, schools can actually bypass consent entirely in dire situations. In an emergency, schools can disclose protected, personally identifiable information without any consent to anyone who can assist. That means law enforcement, parents, or medical professionals. But the threshold for this is very specific. The threat to health or safety must be, legally speaking, articulable and significant. The school can take the totality of the circumstances into account, and as long as they have a rational basis for making that call based on what they knew at the time, federal regulators will not question it.
And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer. You know, the modern classroom is no longer just textbooks and chalkboards, right? It's a complex, interconnected web of cloud computing and personalized learning apps. So as EdTech evolves and weaves even deeper into our educational system, how do we perfectly balance the immense, undeniable benefits of customized learning against the growing risks of constant data surveillance? It's a massive question, and it's one every student, parent, and educator is going to have to answer.